Hey everyone, this is Amanda from Roboflow, and today I'm going to be walking you through the design of BoardBoss, an augmented reality app that we designed and built in order to enhance the physical board game experience. Now, the first version of BoardBoss focused on Boggle, and so the idea is that you would scan a Boggle board with the app, and it would return all the possible words that you could get from those combinations of letters. And so the idea is to take this very analog physical experience and enhance it with something digital. And so what I'm going to be doing today is I'm going to be walking you through how we got to the idea of BoardBoss. I'm going to show you some of the early iterations we did on the design. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we branded it and some of the things that influenced those decisions. And then finally, I'm going to show you a few things that got kind of weird during testing. So if that sounds interesting to you, stay tuned. Hey, welcome back. So before I get started, I just want to say that if you enjoyed this video or any of the other videos on our channel, our team has been spending a lot of time trying to produce great content for our YouTube channel. And so if you have a chance, please subscribe. You'll be the first to know when we publish something new, and it really helps us build an audience going forward. So the idea for BoardBoss came from Brad Dwyer, Roboflow co-founder. And over the past few years, he had been building some really interesting apps using Apple's AR kit. And one of those was Magic Sudoku. So the idea is that you would take your camera and point it at a unsolved Sudoku puzzle, and it would fill in all the solution for you. And so it was a really good demonstration of some of the cool things you can do with computer vision and augmented reality. And he wanted to build more apps like that. So one day I got a message. He said that he was working on something new, and we set up a time to meet. And when I sat down, he put a Boggle board in front of me, or a Boggle box. And so he explained that he wanted to do something very similar to Magic Sudoku, but with board games. And so we started brainstorming what that could look like and how we could really enhance the board gaming experience using augmented reality and computer vision. So the first thing I do with every design project is I really dive into the research and make sure that I fully understand the problem that I'm trying to solve. And for this, it involved just learning as much about Boggle as possible. So what I'm going to do is just walk you through my board in Miro, where I dropped a lot of the things that I was learning during my research into here, as well as design iterations and things like that. So you'll see I have all the different ways that you can play Boggle, from the actual physical board games to electronic devices, virtual reality, game consoles, apps. These were all really helpful for me to get an idea of how to blend that physical board game with the digital one. And one of my favorite things that I found was an old pilot from the Boggle game show from the 90s that I didn't even know existed, but it was just kind of interesting to watch these people play Boggle on a game show. So there's some great stuff that you can find during the research process. Other things I did was as I had bought a Boggle game, and I started playing it more with friends and family. And so I started researching ways to get better at Boggle. And there are some great articles out there with tips on groups of letters to memorize and how to just get better at looking at the board and scanning it in a way and looking for those common letter groups. And so that was really helpful when I was trying to design ideas for BoardBoss. So while I was doing my research, I started taking notes of some high-level pain points. For instance, one of the things that will keep people from being successful with the app is they have to own Boggle. And so we have to make sure that we make that clear up front, that when you download the app, that you'll get the best experience if you have a physical copy of Boggle. This is not just a Boggle app that you don't have to have that. Like that's part of that augmented reality experience. So making sure that we are communicating that up front. The other thing is Boggle rounds usually take about 3 minutes, but it takes a long time to count the score. So if you have 3 or 4 players, you have to go through everyone's list, make sure you cross those out. That seemed kind of tedious when you're playing Boggle in real life. It can also be really difficult if you are not familiar with the Boggle dictionary, because you don't know what words are valid or not. And so that can take a lot of time to look those things up. The other thing that I started making notes of are just some features that we could have in the app, and I started prioritizing them. So what are the things that we have to have? What are the things that we should have? What we could have and what we want. So if you're familiar with the Moscow strategy, that's how I tend to think is, what do we need for this MVP for sure? And really the approach I took early on was making it more of a scorekeeping app, or like an app that would accompany you playing Boggle, which you'll find later on that we kind of took a different approach to that's not the direction we went in, but this is where I had started. So some of the other things I like to do is I like to just kind of map out a workflow. And so this was a diagram that I created in order to show the difference between what's happening in real life versus what's happening in the app. And so it's you open the app, you select the game, you shake up your physical letters, and then you start the timer in the app. And so this kind of shows just how you hop back and forth and how those experiences overlap with one another. So if we zoom out, I can take you over to the first version of the app, which, like I said, was very much about scorekeeping and really just accompanying the physical board game experience, but not really like enhancing it that much. And so we had this cute little raccoon that we decided to kind of play around with a little story here. You start the timer, you scan the letters, and then it goes into a lot of screens that are designed to keep score and also keep track of scores as you play more and more. But as you'll notice, there's only one augmented reality screen here. So that really wasn't the direction we wanted to go in. We decided that we wanted to really focus on this experience and make that really cool and something that's really memorable. So one of the problems with the first version of the app is it's pretty safe. I tended to focus on how can we build an app really quickly and easily? And I didn't really think about the fact that the whole purpose of this app is to do something really new and novel. And so after I got feedback for the first round, I went back to the drawing board and thought about what Brad had said. And he really encouraged me to do something off the wall, something a little wild, and not worry so much about whether we can build it or not. And so I started going back to doing research on different AR apps, especially in the gaming realm. So here you can see there's a Monopoly app here. And I also started to approach this as a data visualization problem. And so I started thinking about like, okay, we have this grid of 16 letters. What kind of data can we learn from these? And like, how can we represent this and overlay it on top of the Boggle grid? And so I started thinking about different ways we could show these as data visualization. So a heat map or the different solutions, how can we show connections between letters and how often those letters are connected based on different solutions? How do we communicate these in a 3D manner or, like create a cool 3D augmented reality experience on top of the board and really bring these letters to life. And so these were some of the concepts that I had come up with. So this one shows you that obviously like the S's are more common, they're going to fit into more words. And so you should really be focusing on those. So again, giving you the same letters, but just giving you a different way of looking at them. This one right here is stacking all the different solutions. And the idea was I was like, oh, it'd be cool if you could like pick out a row and pull it out, And so these were things that I was like, I have no idea how we're going to build, but it'd be really cool if we could do that. So from there, we really focused in on this concept right here. So this idea that we would raise the letters up and highlight the ones that were for different words, and then we'd go through this list. And so this is like kind of the concept that we started to narrow in on. And another piece of feedback that I got from Brad is he really wanted to keep the interface minimal. Like we almost wanted the camera view to be the center of the interface. And so you'll see here that I really tried to be very minimal with the buttons and things that I'm putting on the screen. I want the list to overlay so it doesn't cover up the camera view. And so we started to figure out how to show the list in a different way, how to group things in the list to make it easy to navigate. And so you'll see that these are telling you the words that are worth 3 points, 5 points, 11 points, things like that. And then we also wanted to do an alphabetical list as well. So once we had kind of the initial screens conceptualized, we started to just refine them and think about the different interaction states and how people were going to navigate in and out of the app. And so you'll see the buttons kind of change over time. I started wireframing out intro screens, so adding experiences before and after the augmented reality experience. And we had to start thinking about how ARKit was going to control this interface, and things that we have to think about are permissions and what the experience is going to look like when it's looking for a boggle board, or if the boggle board goes out of the picture, like what's going to happen. So you start to think about all these different edge cases and how you're going to mock these up. And so these screens are walking you through what that looks like. And I started to kind of incorporate some more colors into here and have a little bit more fun with it. Here's some screens of what it looks like when you just use AR kits, like standard scanning interface. So we played around with that, but we weren't sure if that was going to be clear enough of what the app was actually looking for. And then what it would look like when it would find what it was looking for, which was boggle in this case. Again, another workflow map, just kind of showing the different screens that we have to be thinking about. And if someone ends up in a dead end, where do we send them from there? So like, do you have a physical board game? No. So you go back to the introduction. So the next thing I'm going to be talking about is I'm going to start showing you a little bit of what this looks like when all these pieces start coming together. So I had done all these mock-ups, but there's a lot of the technology pieces that have to start working in order for us to keep moving forward. And so one of the first things you have to do is you just have to prototype this in a really rough way to get an idea of can the app detect the letters? Can it detect that there's that this is boggle or not? And can it start feeding us that list back of all the possible solutions? So these screens are really cool because it shows like just the early stages of us trying to figure this stuff out. From there, we started working on what that 3D rendering looked like in the augmented reality piece of this. And so this is an early rendering of that. From there, how do we overlay that onto a grid when we find it? This is really cool because this is when it starts to become real. And this is also when things start to get a little weird. So like sizing and scale and lighting have a huge effect on how the app renders these cubes. So this is another example of just, yeah, like early stages. It's looking for it. Oh, there it is. And it's on top of it. It's a little off kilter, but hey, we have the list now. We're starting to highlight the different words. The user can scroll through alphabetically. Still a little rough, but we're getting there. So as we were building this out, there's design decisions that need to be made throughout, and a lot of it had to do with animation and movement and interaction and colors and things like that. And so occasionally, if we were stuck on something, I would mock it up to show them what I was visualizing, and then Brad would take that into, again, this 3D rendering and start playing around with it. So here's a couple concepts that he had built out. I think one of them he called typewriter. So the idea is that the letters start going up and down. On the right here, we have a version where the letters stay up. I really liked that because I was like, okay, they stay up and it's less movement and more clear as to what the word is. We also tried to figure out, how do we highlight these cubes? Does light come from the inside, or does it come from the top? And I always imagine it kind of like Wheel of Fortune, where like the box would light up. But we played around with a few other options. So on the left is with how the box lights up. On the right is a spotlight. I think we ended up going with the spotlight just because it's very clear, like that there's movement from one letter to another. So these are just like little details that you just kind of have to work through. And I would never know that I needed to decide these until basically they were brought to my attention, because we're just kind of learning what we can and cannot do within ARKit. Here's kind of what these look like once you actually get them into the interface on top of an actual boggle board. And we even had to decide, do we keep these cubes or do we call them, I think they were squircles, is the ones on the right. So if you'll see that the shape is a little more rounded. But yeah, I kind of like the shape of that. I think it's closer to what a boggle cube looks like. Originally we had purple in there, but then I started playing around with more colors. And so we started bringing in this branding that was really bright. I realized that we didn't have to stick with the orange grid that boggle came in. We can make this whatever color we want. So here's some examples of what we started to do once we incorporated a new colors palette. So on these screens, they kind of show you just some of the weird stuff you run into. So things off kilter, things that are too big. On the right, we were testing what it looks like if you take your camera away from the Boggle thing. We wanted to make sure we had an experience where we remember those letters, you can still interact with it, you don't have to hold it above Boggle the entire time. And so this is just some of the testing we had to do with different devices, different versions of Boggle, things like that. And it's always kind of funny and entertaining to look at this stuff. Yeah, here's again some of the weirdness you run into, but we were able to get it working with super big Boggle, and and you just run into these little bugs that you have to kind of pick off as you go. So one of the most challenging things about doing augmented reality apps is you're dealing with people's environments that can vary quite a bit, and so you have to instruct them on how to get their camera in the right position to scan, in this case Boggle. It takes a second for sometimes for the computer to detect the letters and come back with a solution. And if your lighting is really good, or if you're pretty close to the letters, it's obviously going to be a lot faster. Your device has a huge effect on that as well. And so ARKit has its own interface for doing this. That's what you'll see on the left here. But we actually felt like we needed to create our own custom solution for this. And most of the time we try to veer away from custom solutions because they can be hard to maintain. They can take a lot of time to build. But in this case, we thought it would be a much better user experience if we could instruct our users how to make sure that their app is actually going to work. Because if they can't scan Boggle, they won't be successful in using the app. And so the idea is instructing them to get a little closer. If you can hold still, it's going to be more likely to scan it. And on the newer devices, it was usually pretty quick. The older ones, we struggled with this a little bit more. It took a while for it to detect it, but that's just what we tested with a lot of devices and continue to improve this and really focus on this part of the experience. Because again, this is what mattered in the success of the user. So once we had the AR experience working pretty well, the next thing was to focus on the branding and really think about how people come into the app and what does that look like and what is the attitude of that. So these are great things that Brad built out using some of the assets that I provided him. I love that the one on the right, like, gets you right into the camera view. It just kind of backs out and you're right there in the app, ready to scan. And I think it's really important to just get to the meat of the app as quickly as possible. So when it came time to brand BoardBoss, I had a lot of really cool influences that I found. I had downloaded a bunch of AR apps along with just, scouring the internet for anything I could find in recent trends. But this app stood out to me quite a bit. It's called Ferrous Ar. It's a partnership between Google and Childish Gambino, who's one of my favorite music artists, actors. He's great. And so this was really cool because I've noticed this trend where it's almost kind of a throwback to the 80s, early 90s, where it's like dark backgrounds with neon colors. I think this was really great for AR apps because you have these bright colors that can stand up against different backgrounds. And it just has a lot of energy and it has a lot of attitude. And so I use this to heavily influence the branding going forward. And so BoardBoss looks like neon lights. I created these line art versions of all these different games. So it wasn't just Boggle that we were focused on. It was we could expand it to other games. And then I started finding all these like retro looking posters for modern movies, but the color palettes were just so great. And so I just loved these like really high contrast, high energy, futuristic, but yet still retro feeling designs that I kept coming across. And so this kind of just shows you, like, I didn't spend a ton of time iterating on this. I really kind of had an idea of where I wanted to go, but here's some of the early versions. I knew I wanted a scripty font and then I wanted the word boss to have a lot of like weight and really like be bold. And so that's kind of how I came up with the logo. And then when we launched, we just kind of started pulling all these different elements together. And I think it really helped to have the AR experience look really bright and colorful as well. It just blended really well with like some of the rest of the branding. And so these are some of the screenshots that we put together for the App Store. And then we launched it, and it got featured on Product Hunt. I know I played Boggle quite a bit with this and really enjoyed like increasing my score and, challenging people because I'm like, oh, we can look it up right away. And so this is where, all of our hard work came together, and it really ended up being a cool app. And what I really enjoyed about doing this app was it was a lot of new things for me. I had never really worked with AR or computer vision, but it really stretched my skill set and forced me to do something new. And it's fun. Board games are a lot of fun. Spending time with your friends is fun. And so this is just another way that you can bring people together and have some like really cool memories out of it, and get better at playing games. And so this also introduced me to the Roboflow team. And so I've been learning a lot more about computer vision and how computer vision can solve problems like these and enhance experiences. And so overall, this is probably one of my favorite projects I've ever worked on. Hey, thank you for joining me on this peek behind the scenes of the design of BoardBoss. If you're interested in downloading BoardBoss, you can find it in the App Store. Otherwise, if you're interested in learning more about Roboflow and some of the tools we're building to make it easier to build computer vision apps, please go to roboflow.com. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. You'll be notified right away whenever more videos like this are published. Thanks.